Today I'm bringing you an update of one of my favorite builds I've made, and it was an early one back in episode Revenant, but this is what I call the Blight Warlock. It's all about damage over time effects, and it's specifically updated this episode because of the new TechSec Armor Set bonus that boosts kinetic damage, which includes the Necrotic Poison. You can see here, just a couple shots and entire crowds are getting wiped out by poison and kinetic explosions and all of that. On top of that, we have the great Prismatic kit, but we're also stacking every damage over time effect we can. Jolt, Scorch, Volatile, Kinetic Tremors, Area Denial grenade launchers, everything we can. It's really active, it's very fun. You do have to be a bit careful because we don't have a lot of damage resistance, but it's very effective. See this group of Minotaurs here? We're gonna throw some kinetic poison into them, and you see they all get stunned, exploded, and their shields are destroyed. These constructs get demolished too because of the TechSec set, and it's great. You see a boss here, and their health is just going to get absolutely annihilated. Overall, it's really fun, it's really active, and it just demolishes stuff. Now, if all that sounds good to you, let's get into it on Engineer. Just for an overview of the build, the goal here is to throw damage over time all over the battlefield. If you've played like an MMO and you've played a damage over time character, like this is gonna feel very familiar. It's just about constantly keeping them up and reapplying them and just making sure the enemies get worn down. General use is damage and debuffing. I've been using this pretty consistently in master level content, which is 30 power under. I've used it in 50 power content, but everything is very hard there, and a lot of it's going to depend on your play skill, not necessarily your build and just how careful you are. But it is very good to just peek out, throw some damage over time, get back in cover, and stay safe. Now on the pro side, it's active and versatile. I really love playing this build. Like, I don't always talk about this, but the feel of it is really solid. It does a lot of consistent damage. It can multiply teammates' damage because we're applying things like Volatile and Jolt. Those will deal more damage the more damage from your teammates is coming in as well. It has fantastic transcendence and super generation. Now on the con side, this is not a DPS build. I wouldn't take it into a raid. It's not going to do maximum damage. It's very gradual damage. It's not very fast, but it's still very solid in fire team ops and pinnacle ops and things like that. I currently build this with no damage resistance whatsoever, which is a little brutal, but honestly, as you get into harder content, like the damage resistance helps a little bit, but if you're not careful, no matter what, you're gonna get wiped out. So I found it's okay, and it's kind of encouraging me to play a little more carefully, but there are sources of that if you want it. All my healing in this build too is from Orbs and Phoenix Dive. They do have the option of Devour, and there's always using a healing focused weapon to help out with that. All that said, let's get into the details. First up, our exotic is Necrotic Grips. This has a unique poison effect that is only present on a couple of weapons, and this will be applied on any melee hits, whether powered or unpowered, and that damage is kinetic. Now, if you don't have this, you need to own Beyond Light, but now you can get it from Rahul or Zer, thanks to Zer's rework and Rahul's changed. Now, as we're in a new armor system, the archetypes that I would recommend are either Paragon or Brawler, because this is a melee focused exotic, and those are the two archetypes that boost melee. Now, just continuing to go over this a little bit, it's going to boost those weapons of sorrow, but we actually don't want to pair it with those because we want different, unique damage over time effects. Now, as we go over this exotic, let's talk a little more specifically about Necrotic Poison and what it interacts with, and some just damage over time notes. So first, the poison damage does not count as melee damage. It will not be boosted by the melee stat. It will not be boosted by any melee buffs. It is kinetic damage, and it will fill both light and dark gauges slowly, but very effectively. Any source of freeze will cancel any poison, and will honestly cancel almost every dot effect in the game. I don't recommend you include any stasis abilities or freeze in this at all, because it will cause a lot of issues. One really cool thing with this is that Song of Flame melees will keep the poison. It's the only super that does have an interaction with Necrotic Grips, and it's pretty fun. In general, unique damage over time effects will all stack, but if you have the same damage over time source from you and teammates, that will not stack. You don't want to run this with a teammate who is also running this build. You will run into a lot of overlap, and it doesn't necessarily work. If you're thinking between Necrotic Grips and Spirit of Necrotic, do note that Necrotic Grips will escalate the poison damage over time, and that will end up giving you a lot higher damage on single targets. But if you use Spirit of Necrotic from the exotic class items, that is also pretty helpful. But it will not escalate at all, so just note that the damage will be smaller. Now, some of this may not matter depending on the enemies you're fighting, so it's pretty flexible. Moving over to our aspects and abilities, the first aspect I recommend is Hellion. This gives you free Scorch and damage over time. Every time you use your class ability, you get a fire buddy that shoots fireballs at people, and burning stuff is definitely a very effective damage over time source. Now for the second aspect, I actually recommend Weaver's Call, which, whoa, what? what is he thinking? This got a buff with the release of Edge of Fate. Previously, it used to generate Threadlings on strand kills, whether ability or weapon kills, but they changed it so now that it will generate Threadlings on any element kill. And you will also generate 3 Threadlings every time you use your class ability. This is actually really strong, and especially with what we were doing, because we were using so many different elemental effects to get kills and deal damage over time that you will just constantly churn up Threadlings, and then they will get sent out as you throw your melees or shoot. And the really cool thing about this too is this really helps balance out your Transcendence gauge. Generally, because light effects have more AoE like Scorch or Jolt or even Volatile, they will build up a little bit faster, so getting a little bit more help on the darkness side is helpful. Now, if for some reason you don't want to use one of these aspects, Feed the Void is completely fine too. Devour is still very strong, it gives you healing. I do find in harder content though that it falls off pretty hard because on-kill effects are just hard to manage sometimes, but it is definitely a viable option, and if that's more comfortable for you, totally go for it. For the super, I definitely recommend Song of Flame. It fits the theme the most, and it works with the exotic. The melee's proc Necrotic Grips, which is really cool. But if you do want more damage resistance from Facet of Purpose, Nova Bomb is very good because then you'll get overshield on every orb. For the grenade, I really recommend Storm Grenade for Jolt, but if you have another source of Jolt in your kit, say a jolting feedback weapon, you can use Vortex Grenade to get some extra weaken in there and also just get another source of ticking damage. The melee, I absolutely recommend Arcane Needle. It's Unravel, has multiple charges, and it's very ranged, so you can apply that poison constantly. For the class ability, Phoenix Dive is just so cool. It keeps you mobile, gives you healing, gets your Hellion up more often, and it's just a great panic heal. Moving over to Fragments, I pretty much always recommend Facet of Protection because it is damage resistance. Facet of Courage will give you 10% increased damage for your light abilities on darkness debuffed enemies, and that will be most things thanks to Arcane Needle. So that will boost our Song of Flame damage and our Storm Grenade damage and our Hellion damage, and all that's great. Facet of Dominance is a really good one to give Jolt to Storm Grenades, and will also give you Weaken on your Transcendence Grenade, or if you do choose Vortex Grenades, it'll put Weaken on that as well. Facet of Purpose will give you extra healing if you take Solar, but if you do opt for a Void Super, you'll get Overshield, and you could even consider a Strand Super and get Woven Mail, but it will only last for 5 seconds. Facet of Dawn is really one that I ended up picking because of champions this episode. When you get a powered melee hit, you get Radiant for 5 seconds, which is a 20% weapon damage boost, and will apply anti-barrier, which is just really helpful in general play. But if you decide to change out any of these fragments, Facet of Balance is really good for getting more ability energy whenever you get multi-kills with either light or dark. And then Facet of Solitude is also a good option because when you get rapid precision hits, it will sever an enemy, which cuts their damage output by 40%, which is very helpful for survival, but doesn't always work with some of the things we're doing, and we tend to want to switch weapons a bit. So moving over to mods and Armor 3.0 stats. The mod setup is kind of general. I'm using 3 different font mods, a super font, a grenade font, and a class font. I'm doing a lot of kinetic weapon support here because I use a kinetic auto rifle a lot in this to really maximize on the TechSec Armor Set. And then beyond that, it's just general ability regen. I recommend a heavy-handed to make orbs on melee kills because that is an ability we'll have up most often, and also a Reaper just because we want to make a fair bit of orbs because we rely on them for healing. Now on the armor stat side, I recommend you get to 100 in your melee stat, but you don't need to go over it all. We don't need the extra damage from the melee. We're just trying to get the effect applied as often as possible. Because I am not using Feed the Void, I recommend getting health to around 60 to 90, but if you do use Feed the Void, you can probably drop this. I recommend getting super to about 80 plus. There's not been a lot of testing on super generation, but this seems to be about the right point to get your super up consistently. And because we deal a lot of damage, active generation of super is very important to us, and that does get boosted as you get your super stat up to 100. I also recommend you get the class around 90 or higher because you want to get that regen as much as possible because that is another source of our healing and how we get our Hellion up more consistently. Grenade, I recommend you get to about 65 to 70. If you've been following my recent posts on the channel, you get your best returns on grenade and melee regen getting up to 70, and then it kind of drops off and flattens out a bit, and the benefits above there are really if you just want to heavily focus into it, but because grenade's just kind of a thing that we throw out when we can, 70 is perfectly fine. The last stat is weapons. Generally, I don't find weapons to be that valuable unless you can get over 150, and because we definitely can't do that with all these other stats, we're just gonna completely dump it. That's what I'm working with, but as I've said before, this is a very flexible build. The armor Set, which I originally started using this build, and someone in my Discord named Skinny Kent was like, you should try out the TechSec set. It is amazing. So I was grinding for a couple weeks to get to power level 300 so I could start getting some tier 3 drops and build out a good build. And man, it is awesome. I just got it set up a couple days ago and it is a game changer. So if you're not familiar, the 2-piece bonus will give you plus 200% kinetic damage to shields and then plus 15% damage to constructs. Constructs are things like shriekers or turrets or vehicles and things like that. It's a little fuzzy. Now the 4-piece set bonus will, whenever you get an elite kill or break a shield with kinetic damage, it triggers a disorienting kinetic blast in a 10-meter radius, which is huge. And you probably saw it in the opening gameplay there. It is just, if you have a cluster of shielded enemies, they will just destroy each other as their shields pop. It's so cool. The damage isn't huge on this, but just because it stacks up so much and we're also dealing some poison on top of that, it just wipes things out pretty fast. All these things apply to kinetic damage, and your major sources of these are kinetic weapons, necrotic poison, glaive melees, and then for our titans, the severance enclosure blasts on melee kills and hazardous propulsion rockets. Those are all the kinetic damage sources that are pretty commonly available, but lots of cool things to do with this. This is probably my favorite set right now, and I plan to do some more builds with this because I just think it's so cool. Now, as you start planning your loadouts and setup, I've made a calculator listing out every damage over time effect I think of, and you can just kind of go through and pick what you want to use, and it'll count up the amount of different damage over time effects, and it'll also check to make sure you don't have like 2 exotics equipped. I have shown 2 loadouts here. The top one is what I've been using. This is using a kinetic auto rifle, psychopomp, and Leviathan's Breath. But if you don't have some of these older weapons like psychopomp from previous seasons that are no longer accessible, then I created a slight alternative below that, and it's really just you swap out your grenade to a vortex grenade, and then you use a jolting arc legendary weapon so that you can consistently apply jolt, and you can also get some damage over time from a vortex. Once again, this is very flexible. I think if you can hit 7 damage over time effects at once, that's great. And if you do decide to go with Feed the Void, you will lose one of these, but it's not too bad. One thing to note in here is that Psychopomp is really good because it will apply Bolt Charge, which will also give you melee energy back, and it is another source of periodic damage. One last thing to note, I will have a link to the spreadsheet in my description so you can try it out and see what works for you. On artifact mods, I'm only showing a few from column 5. These are the 3 ones that I find best for this build, but you can only pick 2 of these because of how the artifact is set up. So first off is Radiant Shrapnel. So when you deal weapon damage against a combatant while radiant or killing a Scorch combatant with a weapon, it release Solar Shrapnel. With Hellion, we will be scorching enemies pretty consistently, so this is just free extra damage that throws out even more Scorch. And just, you can also take Shield Crush, which will give you increased melee damage and regen speed when you have a defensive buff, or when you are amplified or radiant, it will give you a grenade boost. Now, I've found that the uptime on this isn't super high, so this is probably the one I would drop. Now, the one that I absolutely do recommend though is Tangled Web. So anytime you kill a strand debuff combatant, it will trigger a suspending blast, which is crazy because we're gonna unravel everything. So it just suspends enemies. You probably saw this in the gameplay. Like, you throw an arcane needle into a group, they become strand debuffed, and then the poison ticks through, kills them, and then everything's suspended, and then you start getting kinetic explosions. It's just chaos and craziness, but super fun. Once again, not super complicated, and most of the artifact perks are pretty flexible, but these are the ones I recommend you look at. Moving over to weapons, there are a lot of weapons you can use with this. I've tried to list out a good bit of these, but I'll try and highlight the most important ones. First off, Kinetic Tremors is very good with the TechSec Armor Set. I'm currently using a Giver's Blessing, which is the auto rifle from Kepler. It's very good. There's also a bow from Portal Activities called Mercury A, and it can roll with Kinetic Tremors and Attrition Orbs, which is really fun. In the Kinetic slot too, you have Lost Signal, which is a stasis area denial grenade launcher from Echoes, but that may not be accessible to you if you didn't play back then. There's Wither Horde, which is an exotic kinetic area denial grenade launcher. And then coming next week in Solstice, we will have a Strand area denial grenade launcher, which is very exciting and has some very cool looking perks. Over in our OG slot, the area denial grenade launchers are VS Velocity Baton from Vesper's Host. That is a dungeon. That is Void, which can be very good. And then Psychopomp from episode Heresy. This is Arc, and it can roll with Rolling Storm and some other cool perks. But if you don't want to use those, you can use any Void primary with the stabilizing rounds, or you can even use Facet of Bravery to get volatile rounds after getting a grenade kill. There's also Le Monarch, which has a unique poison effect and is an intrinsic overload bow. That is very effective too. And then lastly, you can just use any Arc primary with Jolting Feedback, which is added in Revenant. Jolt stuns overloads too, which is also nice. I didn't list scorching weapons here. We have a new perk called Burning Ambition, regeneration, which is cool, but we are generally getting Scorch pretty consistently from Hellion, but maybe you drop that for Devour and go with a Scorching weapon instead, and that's totally valid. In the heavy slot, Finality's Augur from the Sundered Doctrine dungeon is a really cool one. It's a solar linear fusion, but it deploys a turret, which is just really cool, consistent damage over time. Anarchy, which is from Forsaken, and you can get it from the Exotic Kiosk in the raid section, is an arc heavy grenade launcher, which has a special damage over time effect, where it strings electricity between 2 points. Deterministic Chaos is an exotic from Lightfall. You get this from doing a quest, but it's a void machine gun with constant volatile and weaken, and has intrinsic anti-barrier. Lastly, Leviathan's Breath is what I'm using. This is a Shadowkeep exotic that you get from the Exotic Kiosk. It is a heavy bow that always applies volatile and has intrinsic unstoppable. On top of this, you can also just use legendary machine guns. Void or Arc are probably your best bet, but I think there's a Solar Trials of Osiris machine gun that's coming out this week, so maybe that'll be good too. Okay, just to demonstrate the gameplay loop, I wanted to show you a longer clip. This is a solo op of K1 Logistics. This is about 30 power under. I've got a fair bit of modifiers on it, but not too complicated. This is a pretty solid mission, and also just something that I had bonus drops on, and I was trying to get this. You can see here, all the enemies are pretty manageable. They're unfortunately invisible, which is a little annoying, but not too bad. When in doubt, just punch stuff, and the poison will take care of it. I am being a little detailed here and trying to kill everything just to make sure my score is good, but this spell works pretty well. This Giver's Blessing that I mentioned earlier is just a pure workhorse weapon. It is so good with enhanced kinetic tremors. See, there's a knight up there, and just explosions go off as soon as a shield gets broken. You can see these explosions here, and they become disoriented, and then they're just super easy to work with. And that is the TechSec bonus there. It's just very good for that. Now, after some slight running, we come over to the boss, and we immediately just tag it with poison, and then put Kinetic Tremors on it, and then just make sure we get our Hellion up, add the Storm Grenade, put the Leviathan's Breath for a Volatile Explosion, and then while that is all ticking on the boss, we can just work on getting rid of some of these enemies. See, our health gets kind of low, so we just go ahead and pop Song of Flame. It is very good for just those kind of moments like that. It gives you 90% damage resistance, which is huge, and we have really solid uptime on it. And it will increase your class ability regen so that you can get your healing up whenever you need to, and that's just very effective. So we just throw out one last hit, and then once again we apply the Scorch, apply the Jolt, throw out some Threadlings, throw out a couple more Arcane Needles because we know we have Transcendence up, and then we will put Kinetic Tremors, and the boss is about to go to the next phase already, and see, pretty much that's it. Now these bosses aren't super hard, but in general this works pretty well. I've used this in some of the Mythic campaign missions, and it's been pretty effective. Mythic campaign is also just very chunky, but you just have lots of consistent damage that you can keep putting out. Just gonna wipe out the enemies while they tell us where the objective is. Seems like we've hit the right spot point here, and now it's telling us where the damage bonus is, so we will just filter out some enemies, take this out, and then we can work on the boss. The Necrotic Poison is very good for things like this, where the boss isn't standing somewhere where you can shoot him. You can just apply it, sit in the bubble, and then it'll work. See, we put on the Kinetic Tremors, put on the Volatile, and then just nuke this boss. That's pretty much it. Nothing too crazy, just consistent damage and just enough healing to keep you going, and it works pretty well. Just to summarize that gameplay loop, for ad clear, just rotate through your dots, keep in mind your cooldowns, prioritize your Transcendence gauge, try to get that up as much as possible, and then you can use that to apply a lot of poison around the field. Use Song of Flame for extra damage or 90% damage resistance. In Song of Flame, just try and prioritize your melee. I usually never use the grenade because it'll last a lot longer, giving me that damage resistance for longer and letting me spread more poison. Now for bosses, the general rotation you want to do is you want to throw your grenade, use your melees up, activate Transcendence, hit as many weapon-based dots as possible during Transcendence, and Song of Flame if needed. As noted before, the Transcendence grenade will weaken, so get that up as soon as possible and keep applying it to bosses so that you can keep doing 15% more damage. Overall, not super complicated, very flexible. I really like this build. It's super fun. As a wrap up, I just want to say thank you to all my supporters. I really appreciate all the new channel members who have joined recently, especially when I haven't been putting out videos. If you aren't aware, I have not been putting out videos while Bungie tried to figure out what was going on with the armor stats. They have kind of fixed it. You can see my posts on my channel and I'll do a video eventually, but they've slightly fixed it. And then according to today's TWID, they are just saying that the UI is wrong for the other stuff, which I don't think is correct, but I think this is about where it's going to be. So I feel comfortable making build videos now without things dramatically changing, but I really hope they sort out what they plan to do with armor stats in the long term. Now, to thank all my supporters, I have Rogue9, Sifrid, Danny Simmons, Monty KY, Wolfgame07, Velvet Hammer, Louis, Equitas Mirage, Sushi Juice, Matty the Ace, Davey0011, Infernal Park 111, and Aradriel. Thank you all for supporting me and just making sure I can do this more often. I also want to say that I really appreciate all the support on the channel. I broke 5,000 subscribers shortly after Edge of Fate launch, which is huge. I really appreciate all of it, and I have a lot of fun making build videos, and I plan to make a lot of them soon. Not everything in Destiny is perfect, but I still think there's tons of fun gameplay, and even if not all the content is brand new builds make it feel a lot more fresh. With that, thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one.